Good morning. Let me see if I can get this started because I'd like to do a screen share this morning. Make it a little more interesting than just sitting there watching me, I think. So let's see if I can get this to work and do a screen share. Well, apparently the screen share portion doesn't work. Someday maybe I can figure that out because it would have been really kind of cool to see this. I had a bunch of slides for you that I was going to show you. But let's get started. The national anthem, Star Spangled Banner. There's been a lot of controversy over even this today. But the history is important. It's our history. It's our country's history. It's the history of the challenges and the battles that we fought. And it started in 1812, the War of 1812. And you probably remember, you should remember the war because the question on the test, when was the War of 1812? Yeah, it was 1812. 1812 to 1814. In Maryland, it was a stormy, humid time in central Maryland in August of 1812. And the country was being split by the British. The British were trying to control shipping on the seas. And they thought if they could control shipping on the seas, they could control this country. And so the British decided to attack this country. And first they thought if they could come down from the north, from Lake Champlain from the north, and attack us from the north, they could split off New England. And if they came up from the south, the Mississippi River, I guess, if they came up from the south and they could split off the western part of the country that was growing. And then they set their target on Baltimore. See, Baltimore at that time was the largest port on the eastern seaboard. And all of the shipping traffic and everything came through that port. Now, as a small, young country, see, we had only declared independence in 1776. What was that, 24 and 38 or so years before that? And the Constitution has only been in place for a few years. And so we were a struggling country. We were still trying to grow. And the British thought if we could capture Baltimore, we could cut off the country right in the middle, split them in half, and take over. So it began with a battle on the seas, on the ocean. We were pretty horrible in our, quote, Navy, battling them on the seas. Our infantry did a lot better. We had a lot of victories that we fought, and we had some success there. But then in August of 1814, and actually if communication had been faster across the ocean, this whole war would have been not necessary because they had already agreed to terms to settle the conflict and settle the war, but because it took so long for communication to get back and forth across the ocean, it just took forever. And so this battle raged on, this war raged on. And in August of 1814, the British invaded Washington, D.C. They sailed up the Potomac with a lot of ships, 10,000 troops, a lot of ships, and they sailed up Potomac and they marched on Washington, D.C. And they ended up burning the city. They captured a lot of the buildings. They ran people out of the city. In fact, President Madison had left early with a lot of the official papers, the Constitution, the Declaration of Independence. All of those papers were taken out of the city. And so they marched on the city, and it's interesting. His wife, Dolly Madison, y'all have heard of Dolly Madison, she was planning a dinner party in the executive mansion, as it was called at the time. And all the table was set with all the fine dining china and food. And she was one of the last ones to leave. And when she left, there was a painting of George Washington that hung on the wall. It's a very famous painting. And it's one that's kind of like not quite finished at the bottom. And it was screwed to the wall. And so she took an axe and she chopped it out of its frame in order to protect that painting, because she knew the British would desecrate it and burn it. And so by the evening of August the 24th, the British had invaded Washington, and they set fire to a lot of the buildings, the Capitol building, a lot of the federal buildings, and the executive mansion, and pretty much burned it to the ground except for the stone exterior of that building. And it's interesting that it used to be called the executive mansion. That's where the president lived. And today we call it the White House. And the reason comes from this battle. The reason it's called the White House today is because they decided after they rebuilt it that they needed to hide all the scorch marks on the stone exterior of the building. And so they painted it white. And it's been called the White House ever since. After the British finished their work in Washington, and in fact, during that night, after they set fire to all the buildings, there was a terrible storm that came through. And a lot of people think it might have been a hurricane, some kind of storm, a lot of wind, a lot of rain, and it put out a lot of the fire. So it didn't do a lot of damage, but it really did pretty much burn out the interior of the executive mansion, the White House. Once they were done, they went back to their ships and they set sail for Baltimore. Now, like I said, Baltimore was the largest port on the eastern seaboard at the time, and very important to our country. And all of the shipping and trade came through Baltimore. Living in Baltimore was a young attorney called Francis Scott Key. And he was concerned about the war, and he was asked if he would go and negotiate with the British to release some of the American soldiers and prisoners that the British had taken, and especially a very elderly Dr. William Beans, who had been taken prisoner because he was accused of being abusive to British prisoners and not taking care of them and not healing their wounds. And Francis Scott Key and John Skinner were asked to go talk to the British and negotiate for the release of the prisoners and release of the doctor. And he took with him these letters from some of the British soldiers who had been taken prisoner and who had been cared for by Dr. Beans, who said, the doctor took very good care of us. He healed our wounds. He was very kind and compassionate to us. And after the negotiation went on and the British commander read the letters from the British sailors that had been taken prisoner, he decided to go ahead and let the prisoners go and let Dr. Beans go. But he couldn't let them go yet because they had been sitting there around the dinner table on board the ship planning the attack on Fort McHenry that guarded the entrance to the port and the harbor at Baltimore. And if they were going to take Baltimore, they had to attack the fort, and they had to take the fort because the guns of the fort protected the harbor and protected the city of Baltimore. So since they had already been talking about this attack and what they were going to do, they couldn't let Francis Scott Key and John Skinner and Dr. Beans go, because then they would tell everybody. So they said, we're going to let you go, but you have to wait until this battle is over. And so at about 7 a.m. on the morning of September the 13th in 1814, the bombardment of the fort began. Now, what's interesting about the bombardment is the guns on the British ships could reach about 2 miles. It's a long way, 2 miles. The guns in the fort could only reach about a mile, mile and a half. They were smaller guns. So truly, they were outgunned. There were over 10,000 troops on these ships that had entered the harbor, so they were probably outmanned, because in Fort McHenry, there was only about 1,000 men. And Colonel Armistead was in charge of the fort and the men. So at about 7 o'clock in the morning on September 13th, this bombardment began. And these bombs, basically when they would fire out of the cannon, it would light a fuse inside the bomb, and they would ultimately explode, raining shrapnel down on the fort. Or if they landed in the fort and then exploded, shrapnel would go everywhere. And these were big, round bombs. Also, they would shoot these rockets. They were called, I think, Krieg rockets, that would scream and screech across the sky. And we have a lot of fireworks like that today that just kind of scream and screech across the sky. They didn't do a lot of damage. They were scary, and that was the intent, was to scare people. The big hazard was the bombs. During the battle, one of the bombs landed on the powder magazine, which is a small building inside the fort where they kept all their gunpowder. And it went through the roof and it landed inside the building. And word came to Colonel Armistead that a bomb had hit the magazine. And he knew that because of all of the gunpowder in the magazine, that if it exploded, it would kill everybody inside the fort. So he said, close the doors. There's nothing we can do. He knew either they would all die, or they would just run out of gunpowder and probably die anyway, but they would continue to fight. And so the battle raged on all night long, with these rockets streaking through the sky and these bombs exploding in the air, raining shrapnel down on the fort and terrifying these men in the fort, terrifying the citizens of Baltimore who were watching this happen, wondering what was going to happen to their city. They flew a flag over the fort during the battle. It's called a battle flag, small flag. And as the bombs would explode in the air, Francis Scott Key could still see that flag flying. And as long as he saw that flag flying, he knew that the Americans had not given up and that they were still fighting and the British had not captured the fort. Well, at about 7 a.m. on the morning of the 14th, there was an eerie silence that came over the whole harbor. And as the sun started to come up, and in the harbor there's mist on the water, and the smoke from all of the bombs and the cannons all night long just filled the harbor. And as the sun started to come up, and the mist and smoke started to clear, the old doctor is asking Francis Scott Key, can you see the flag? Can you see the flag? Because they knew that if they could still see the American flag, they knew that the Americans had survived and had won. But if the British flag flew over the fort, they knew that the British had won and our country would be over as we knew it. And so Dr. Beans, who was elderly and ill, was laying on the deck of the boat. He couldn't see, so he asked Francis Scott Key, can you see the flag? And that's where the story starts. That's where the poem starts. The poem that Francis Scott Key wrote is called The Defense of Fort McHenry. And it's a 4-stanza poem that tells the story of the whole night and of the battle. And it's interesting that there's a 4-stanza poem that tells the whole story, yet we only sing the first verse. Now that you know the story, I'm going to give you the words. And in the first verse, it's the old doctor speaking. And he's asking Francis Scott Key, can you see the flag? Can you see the flag? Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming. And the rocket's red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? You can hear Dr. Bean saying, oh, can you see the flag? He said, oh, say, can you see the flag? It says, oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light, the sun's coming up. Francis, the sun is coming up. Can you see the flag? We saw it last night while the bombs bursted in the air and the rockets were flying through the sky. We could still see the flag, but is it still there? In that first verse, it talks about, or the ramparts we watched. The ramparts are the high walls. It's the protection around the fort. So that flag was flying above the fort. And he's saying, talking about those walls. The first verse is only a question. We sing it every time we have a sporting event. We never sing the answer. We never talk about the answer. We only ask the question. I think sometimes we should sing the whole song, but we should know the answer to the song. So the second verse gives the answer. On the shore dimly seen, through the mist of the deep, where the foe's haughty host in dread silence reposes, what is that which the breeze o'er the towering steep, as it fitfully blows, half conceals, half discloses? Now it catches the gleam of the morning's first beam, in full glory reflected, now shines on the stream. 'Tis the Star-Spangled Banner, oh, long may it wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. He talks in there about the towering steep. That's again the ramparts. The bombardment has failed and Fort McHenry has survived, and the flag now shines. They have raised a flag that is 30 by 42 feet. Huge flag. Because they wanted the British to be able to see it as far as they could down the harbor. And that's the flag that Francis Scott Key saw as the sun came up and the mist parted. And it says, through the mist of the deep, they saw this flag, and it was gleaming in the water, and it was blowing and flying proudly. In the third stanza, the third verse, Francis Scott Key takes opportunity to kind of rag on the British, to shout abuse at them. Because, I mean, why not? We just won. I think it's a little bold. He's still on their ship. I think it's a little bold, but he didn't tell him. He just wrote all this down. And he's seeing them turn away and sail away because they cannot capture this fort. And so he rags on them a little bit, and he talks about how awful they are. And during World War II, the third verse was removed from the song because in World War II, the British were our strongest allies. We were their strongest allies in World War II. And so why would we have that in the song? But it's part of the poem. It's part of the history. It's part of the story. And so here's the words. And where is that band who so vauntingly swore that the havoc of war and the battle's confusion, a home and a country would leave us no more? Their blood has washed out their foul footsteps' pollution. No refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. And the Star Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. There's a lot of controversy about this song today and about the words in that verse where he talks about no refuge could save the hireling and slave from the terror of flight or the gloom of the grave. I believe he's talking about actually how everybody in the country, everybody in the city were equals in this fight against the British. In fact, the British had even taken some of the African-American citizen slaves, African-American slaves, and brought them on board their ship as slaves to fight back against us. But I think what he's really talking about is there was no separation of persons. Everybody was equal in this battle. Nobody could get away from it. Nobody could hide from it. It didn't matter who you were. In the fourth verse, truly, I think we should sing the fourth verse as our national anthem and not the first verse. Because Francis Scott Key in the fourth verse turns his attention to the future. He's witnessed this battle. He's witnessed this victory. But now he looks to the future of the country. And truly, I think this is the most important verse. It's one that you've probably never heard. And I don't think he could have felt any other way because of the victory we had achieved. And now our country is going to survive. Our country is going to be really strong because we've defeated the British twice now. So here's the fourth verse. Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto, in God is our trust. And the Star-Spangled Banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. He looks to the future, to today. as far into the future as today, when the free men in this country stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation. That's what the national anthem is all about. That's what the Star Spangled Banner is all about. The men who stood between the battle of the war and the horrors and terrors of the war and their homeland and the people of their country and their loved ones. That's what the national anthem is about. That's what we continue to fight for today. That's why I think our national anthem, the song we sing, should be the fourth verse, because it looks to the future. Colonel Armistead, who was commander of Fort McHenry at the time, when he wrote his after-action report to the Secretary of War, he said, "It affords me the highest gratification to report to you that not a man shrunk from his duties." The battle was horrible. The war was terrible. This battle was horrible because our guns couldn't reach the ship and they were sitting ducks. But we survived. And in that fourth verse, he talks about the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. And I believe that power still exists today to preserve this nation, no matter what the battle is, no matter what the war is, if it's across the seas or if it's right next door. Because we have people who are willing to stand up for what's right and for what we believe in and for the freedom that this country gives. Some people want to do away with our freedom today. I don't want this to be political, but some people want to do away with our freedom, and they have wanted to do that ever since we decided to take it. So those are the words of the national anthem. That's the story. You probably didn't know the story. You probably never heard the words of verses 2, 3, and 4, and probably never 3. So the next time you hear the national anthem, I want you to remember the story. I want you to remember the words. Yeah, understand that you're singing, you're listening to only a question, but now you know the answer. And you know the future. Oh, thus be it ever when free men shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation. Blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just. And this be our motto: in God is our trust. And the star-spangled banner in triumph doth wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave. Have a wonderful Independence Day. Celebrate as best you can in these times. Enjoy fireworks, enjoy food, enjoy family, stay safe, and continue to fight for the freedom that this country brings to every single person living here. And I will talk to you tomorrow.